So would you all join me in welcoming Dave Warda, who is the president of the Peterborough District Labour Council. Hi, Dave.
Hi, how are you? May I start?
Yes.
If you were here for the first interview with John M.
With John.
From Warsaw.
Yes.
That's where I live.
You live in Warsaw right now?
Warsaw, Ontario. Rock Road. I'm on Rock Road.
Rock Road.
Basically neighbors.
Basically neighbors, all right.
Come over for a swim after the show.
Oh, heck yes. You all heard him. Are you from Peterborough? I know you went to Trent and then you went to Queens. Are you a Peterborough boy?
So no, I'm not a Peterborough boy, and I get reminded of that. I came here in '89, Peterborough, to start university, and then fell in love with the place, and came back and raised my kids here, and now I live in Warsaw.
So where were you raised?
Ottawa.
Oh, you're an Ottawa kid. Okay. All right. Yeah, you're going to eat the front of that mic. That's where it's hottest. So you were a high school teacher. Is this true?
That's right. Yeah.
And so how long did you teach before there was a switch to the work you do now?
It kind of comes on gradually. So I graduated to become a teacher in the early 90s, and if anyone remembers the Ray days back then. And
there were no jobs.
No jobs, right? My wife and I traveled around the world. I did other work, and then I ended up as a teacher in the late 90s. I started as an occasional teacher and then became a full-time teacher at Thomas A. Stewart.
Yay! All right, there we go.
And then moved to Kenner later on.
Oh, yeah?
Declining enrollment and so forth as Peterborough grew and changed and shrank and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you was there ever an imagining you'd become so involved in the labor movement, in the work of labor, when you were starting out as a teacher, when you got those first jobs at TAS and then at Kenner?
Well, I guess I had an affinity for the issues that we were facing. I mean, when I first started, it was the Harris years in Ontario, where the public sector was being under attack, and for the first, I think, half of the year that I got a contract, I was teaching 404 with 4 different classes and no prep time, and so during that time of being a new teacher, it was overwhelming, right? And the union was very active in trying to push back against the employer, the government, and so you just get drawn in. First, someone says, "Hey, would you like to join a committee?" And then you're volunteering a couple of nights a month, and then all of a sudden, I don't know if you know the union movement, but if you put your hand up, you get a job. So that's what sort of happens. But yeah.
And so, as a school teacher, as a public school teacher in this area, so you work for the what is it called?
Kawartha Pine Ridge District
Kawartha
School
Pine Ridge,
Board.
And it's one of the largest school boards around, isn't it?
Geographically,
yes, what is your union? What is the union that represents your people?
So I belong to the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation. So it's secondary school teachers.
OSFDF?
TF.
OSFTF.
Teachers. But in the 90s, they organized a lot of education workers. So we did, in this play, there's some organizing, right? Yeah. So during the 90s and early 2000s, we went out and organized some other education workers. So it's not just teachers. It is in Peterborough, but around the province, education workers are from custodians to secretaries to office workers to psychologists and so forth. Yeah.
How many people belong to your union across the province?
So across the province, about 60,000.
60,000.
That could be an overestimation, but it's a lot.
Range?
It's a lot.
Right, and so in this area, how many people belong?
So in this area, we have 700 or so full-time teachers, and then about 300 occasional teachers.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what does it mean to be in a union? Like, what does a union do for a teacher? We'll start with the teachers. We'll go larger in a bit. But what does a union do for a group of teachers?
So it provides you with an opportunity for being able to articulate your working conditions, to try and say, this is where my life begins and my job ends, but also trying to negotiate fair wages. So, early in my career, I had an opportunity. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to work, and someone said, "Hey, I had a friend at Lakefield College." And they said, "Hey, come on out, work out here. It's great. You can do anything with the kids." And it's a very precarious situation. While you get to teach some amazing opportunities, you can lose your job at the end of every year. So the security of Being a unionized member means that just because you're not the shiny new thing, you're not going to get fired.
Right.
Or let go.
Yeah. So in your union, everyone knows what everyone is making, or
yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, this is public record now. I mean, it used to be, but when I first started, every school board was a little bit different. In fact, Peterborough County Board of Education was behind the curve. Like it had a salary grid that was much smaller, but when we amalgamated, and then everything's been much more transparent around the province. So a teacher makes the same amount of money here in Peterborough as they do in Toronto. And it's much more expensive to live in Toronto. So, so now that our school board is growing, we have people coming from Toronto wanting to work here.
Right. And so is the sort of the document under which you all work, is that the collective agreement?
It's called the collective agreement.
And what are the elements of, and is that across the board for unions, the document or contract under which you all work is a collective agreement?
Yeah, you can call it a contract, or you can call it a collective agreement. The collective is the number of workers, right? So I represent the workers, and we try to work with management to come up with an agreement on the things that matter to workers. It's not just working conditions, but it's grievance procedure. Like when they have a problem with one of our members, or I have a problem with them about how they've administrated something, I can go to the collective agreement and say, you've broken the collective agreement, and that could result in a grievance, or it could result in an adult conversation. And often, because of the work we do, we have adult conversations, and usually we resolve things that way.
And so a contract or collective agreement, how long in duration are they, and what happens when they expire?
So you'll often hear in the news, like, they've been without a contract.
Yeah.
They've been without a contract. And you're not really without a contract. The term of the agreement may be 3 years, maybe 4 years, and often they run out. And then while you're negotiating the next iteration of the contract, the old one still is in play.
Okay.
Stability is the whole.
So
purpose.
if we look at your union, is it a provincial-wide contract that is negotiated? Is it a local contract? I asked a good question. I have to think about it.
It's a good question, and this is where I think we lose the public, because in the education sector, there's a provincial level of the collective agreement and a local level. And the provincial level, because the employer is the provincial government, all the money stuff is at the provincial level, funding for school boards and funding for salaries and so forth. And then at the local level, we work out some of the nuts and bolts of working conditions and how to solve problems, that sort of thing.
As they pertain to teachers in this district.
Yeah.
And why would those be different? Why would there be a necessity of local parts of the collective agreement?
Well, I think it's prescribed by legislation for one.
Okay.
So that's the boring part. But to solve problems at the school level or at the shop level, like in the show, you have to have people who understand what the issues are. So like in the play tonight, you've got that union organizer that comes from Toronto, but he's looking for someone who's had experience on the shop floor to negotiate the contract. And so I guess for us, it's how we sort out our local issues and how they pertain to us, because the issues that we face here in Peterborough would be different than the issues that you face in Kenora or Toronto or somewhere else.
Right. And so I'm curious, when a collective agreement is coming towards being expired, is it a group of you that sit together and kind of, thumb the pages and think, how does this look? What do we want? And then how do you know what you want from your membership?
Well, we survey the membership. That's pretty common. It's very easy to do now with all the different tools we have. So surveying the membership is one thing, but also you review over the last 3 or 4 years what have been the sticking points. Where have we had disagreements with the employer? Where have been some issues? And then, of course, we're always trying to keep up with inflation. So there's always the other issues about trying to keep up with the wages so that the folks can continue to enjoy a stable employment.
Yeah, that must be weird right now with what's happened with inflation in the last 18 months, right? Because cost of living is not keeping up with inflation, right?
Absolutely, and I really am excited about this play tonight, and if you haven't seen the play and you're here tonight, you're in for a real treat.
You saw it last Friday, right?
I saw it last Friday, and I read about the Tilco strike. I wasn't in Peterborough when the Tilco strike happened, and it's this relatively small story, but it's a universal story. And I think what's really important for me in this play is that it's the continuous struggle for women to be paid more than, they're paid in this show. They're getting minimum wage or just barely above minimum wage in some cases, and women continue to be, even if they're unionized in Ontario, they continue to struggle to get paid what men get paid, and with. If I can just, because I've been thinking about it, I didn't know what you were going to ask me.
Yeah, I know I wouldn't let you. I know I didn't tell you.
So one of the things in the play is about these court injunctions and how the legal system kind of benefits the employer rather than the workers. And today, especially a lot of our public sector workers are significantly impacted by the legislation that was passed, Bill 124. You might have heard about it. It tried to suppress wages to 1% for anyone in the public sector. And specifically, it didn't apply to police and fire, okay?
Yep.
But in the female-dominated work sectors, education, healthcare, social services, 1%. Guess what? Those are sectors that are dominated by women. In education, it's 70%.
Wow.
In healthcare, it's 80 or 90%. And so the government is doing a really good job of using its tools to suppress wages for women.
Yeah.
So the story
continues to this day.
Continues, right?
Yeah. Now, have you been around a bargaining table? So tell me about that. Is there's 3 or 4 of you. There's management, which is, I guess, government officials. Who does this bargaining?
Yeah, I've been sort of at ringside. I mean, locally I've been at the bargaining table, and it's much more, it's like an adult conversation. You're going through documents. It's not as charged as it is here in the play. Much more exciting in the play. But at the provincial level, I was at the table for the last round, and I was sort of I had a different position, and I was in another room where the lawyers and the chief negotiators are there, and they're working with the lawyers for the government, and they're trying to sort of bash out. But it's challenging because no one wants to give in, right? They don't want to give in. It's not like solving a problem. They want to hold their positions. And when things become positional, we don't actually solve whatever the problem is.
Okay, so people dig in, and then we might have a situation where, how do you know as a union organizer, as a union executive, when you're going to do work to rule, or you're going to call a strike, or you're going to start to do things that are supposed to, be painful for management, right, or for the owners?
Yeah, it should be a strategic process that gradually you want to put some pressure on the employer. Like in education, you don't want to hurt the kids. It's a terrible thing to do, and so you want to put pressure on the employer, not on impacting the kids. I forgot the question.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how you know when to work to rule.
Stage it up.
Stage it up. Okay,
Yeah, I mean, first of all, a lot of our members, and going on strike, it's a huge risk. I mean, no one wants to go on strike. People think that, they want to go on strike. The unions want to go on. We don't want to go on strike. Very expensive, right?
And you stop getting paid, is that right?
Yeah.
So you guys collect dues, so you will get some strike pay. Is this correct?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Strike pay is you can't live on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's $25 a day, $50 a day, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So how is the decision made?
So
for those
it's
things?
gradually. You're gradually trying to put pressure on the table to get the results. So you start it with small things. You do irritants. Maybe you arrive just all together at once. Show some unity. So show some pressure on, and then you gradually get to the strike. You also have to make the case to your members that going on strike is worth it, and that's the challenge too. Like, people think that it's really easy to go on strike. It's not. You can take one strike vote in Ontario, and so you have to make sure that you have made a good case to your members that you're going to want to go on strike, because there's no turning back. If you don't get a strong mandate, let's say you get 60%, it's not worth it, because it's so hard, as you'll see in the play tonight, how difficult it is to keep people united when the community is on your case, right?
And when there are the economic pressures as well,
Absolutely.
right? force. I mean, because some of the women in the play they're not breadwinners in their house. I mean, they put money into the house, but some of the women are the sole breadwinners in their house.
For sure.
And then the stakes are even higher then. Now, have you ever walked the picket line? Have you ever been on strike?
Oh yeah, we were on strike a couple of years ago. It was a rotating strike, so we tried to be strategic provincially, so that people were only out for a day. That way we didn't have to cancel extracurriculars and so forth, but it's costly, right? And with the margins being so tight, I mean, if you go out for a week or two, it takes a long time to recover that salary that you lose, right?
Yeah. So now you work. Do you work for your union now? Are you paid by your union?
So I work full time for OSSTF.
Yep.
And then I get to volunteer as the president of the Labour Council.
Okay, so tell me about that. Tell me, because that's a long storied history with the Peterborough and District Labour Council. Yes.
Yes, it is a long storied history, and you probably have the wrong person to tell you about the history. But I have learned a little bit in preparation for the interview.
Thank you.
One of the things is that Peterborough is very much a union town, right? And so big that they had two different labor councils and two different factions, right? Much more militant, communist
focused, yeah.
And then a much more sort of middle of the road labor council. And I'm probably more of the middle of the road public sector guy, not the radical guy. But we have a labor council now that represents a lot more public sector unions because, as you know, a lot of our industrial employers have sort of left town or gradually shrunk over the last 30 years.
Yeah. What you'll hear in the play tonight is that at the point of the play there were 54 trade unions in Peterborough, and there was this real split between the sort of communist leading ones and the CCF, right? I think that's what Joan Sangster called it, more like the NDP, socialistic kind. And so how many unions do you represent through the Peterborough District Labour Council?
Well, a lot of the unions that are in town are attached to provincial affiliates, and so they're entitled to be part of the Labour Council, but it's very difficult to get them to come to show up. So we don't have, we have a small, the unions are facing the same challenges that churches face, as some of the older folks understand the value of collectivism, and some of the younger folks have trouble figuring that out.
It's so interesting because it's different than when Dr. Sangster was here last week. She was talking about wildcat strikes of the 50s, 60s, 30s, where the young men were really happy and thought they weren't being represented by the sort of the stodgy old ones. Right. It's interesting that sounds like it switched a bit, where young people don't see the power and importance of collectivity.
Well, I think it's pervasive in our society, really. Yeah. I mean, it's not just union people; it's all over. I mean, I was thinking about the play, and I was thinking and reading about the Tilco strike, and they had the big protest,
the rally,
the big rally where they recorded them, and that led to them getting in trouble. Only 300 people at that rally, right?
Yeah, I know.
And yet Peterborough had well over 10,000 people that were probably unionized at the time. Think of all the people at GE, all the people at Outboard Marine, all the people in all the other. I mean, this is a real union town. And only 300 people, and so it gave me a little bit of pause because folks still struggle to put their necks out, right?
Yeah. Now, when the whole thing was happening with the educational assistance, is this in the fall of last year?
Yep.
It's that new, right?
Yeah.
You were part of a huge protest.
Absolutely.
Up at Dave Smith was here earlier today. My worlds are colliding. But
I'm glad he's not here now.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah. He's doing a little thing on tourism and a little video, trying to do a diners, drive-ins, and dives about tourism in the province in his new job.
Good.
Yeah. But you did a massive protest up at that was when he was up on Water Street then, right?
It was huge, yeah.
Yeah, so how many people were at that?
It's funny that the first day, they really were out for 2 days.
Okay.
And I drive from Warsaw. I dropped my daughter off at Adamscott. And I came up Water Street past the zoo, and I started seeing people. It was 7 o'clock in the morning, all wearing purple. There must have been 700-800 people outside of Dave Smith's office, right by Marina there, right?
Yeah, Marina Boulevard and Water there. He's moved now, I think.
Yeah,
scared him
he has moved. Yes, doesn't like the attention.
And what was that like for you to see that number of people?
It's kind of exciting, especially when it takes a lot to get. It takes a lot to get people's attention now. We're so distracted by our phones and multimedia and everything. So for people to understand what the issues are, and the Laura Walton, so a female leader of QP, education workers in Ontario, they did a fabulous job of informing the public about their issues. And so it was exciting to see that. at the end of the day, it's a big risk. It's a big risk to go on strike, and then they had to go to the table and negotiate a contract. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you come from a union background?
Well, yes, I guess. My dad worked for the public service in Canada, and also he tells a great story of how he tried to go on strike as a strawberry picker in British Columbia as a 16-year-old kid. Yeah.
Wow, so agitation.
It didn't work out for him.
It did not, okay.
Yeah.
And tell me about, so when we were researching the play and researching unions here, there's a lot of businesses in Peterborough actually do have unions. I was actually surprised.
Yeah.
Tons of Unifor chapters.
Yep.
And so tell me about sort of the unions that people belong to who live in our region.
So the shift has moved from, there are some small private sector unions, very small. Sometimes like there's only 20 members in their unit or whatever. But Unifor is big. Unifor is the old CAW, and so
Canadian Auto Workers.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Unifor merged a bunch of different unions, and they're pretty big. But they have. There's been some splits at the.
Well, I was going to say, like, they've had a real challenge with corruption, yes?
So
at the very top?
There's been some, accusations of raiding, which raiding is when.
What's that?
Raiding is when, you go after members of another union. Or
Never even heard of this.
Yeah. So in the labor movement, we sometimes fight each other more than we fight the employer, right? They can happen, right?
Yeah.
Big families, So there is some division at the higher ups.
Right, so, but is there CUPE here, there's OPSU here, what else is here?
CUPE, OPSU, there's...
oh, that's good, yeah.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
ETFO, the OECTA teachers as well.
That's the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario?
OECTA is the Catholic teachers,
Okay.
So they're elementary and secondary.
Okay.
ETFO is the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, and then when this play was on, there was the men's teachers, and then there's female teachers, because women had their own union as elementary, and that changed over time.
Right. And nobody who is a teacher
Yep.
can opt out of the union.
That's
is that
correct.
part of the agreement?
I never signed, I never joined, I just got a job and then became yes.
Yeah.
It's legislated, yeah.
It seems to me it's a bit in your belly, your passion about collectivity and the power of that. Can you talk to me a bit about that? Like, why?
Well, if we're honest with ourselves, we don't achieve anything on our own. When you see this in the work you do in a play, right? There's a star sometimes. Maybe but there's so many people involved with success, and you see it in education, and you see it in sports, and you see we need each other to be creative. We need each other to achieve and meet the challenges of the day. And so, for me, it makes a lot of sense to be part of a like-minded group of people trying to achieve fairness in the case of a union. Yeah.
What's the best part of your job?
Well, for the last 10 years or so, I've been working as a local leader, and people go through difficult things in their lives, right? And sometimes they don't have anywhere to go when they hit a crisis. It could be a personal crisis, it could be work crisis, it could be health crisis, and so the union provides really important support for them in those situations, because someone can be facing really challenging times, because you never know when you might get cancer, you never know when your marriage might fall apart or whatever, and things don't always go according to plan. And that can affect how you behave at work. So sometimes people get in trouble at work because their lives are blowing up somewhere else, and so it provides me with that opportunity to be able to support and get them through that difficult time.
Hardest, worst part of your job that you wish you didn't have to do? If there is?
Well, I get to be, the other, good part of my job is I get to be sort of an armchair psychologist, trying to figure out why someone has done something, and it can be challenging not knowing for sure when someone's telling you the truth.
Interesting. So in terms of when you're doing investigations or information gathering, is there anything else I've missed that you want folks to know about?
I'm going to touch back to the play. The play leaves on a lot of strikes don't end the way you want them to. It's not always a happy ending. And you're trying to look for moral victories. And last week you had Lily Chang here. She's
tell everyone.
She's I think number 2 in the CLC. So it's the Canadian Labour Congress. It's sort of the umbrella organization for all unions in Canada. So in the play, the men are the ones that take over the narrative, right? They go to jail. It's all about men going to jail, blah, blah, blah. Not the women that put their necks on the line and suffered the most. Union leadership in Ontario and in Canada is more and more women. So Bea Brusk, who we tried to get here, she's like the president of the CLC, and maybe we'll get her for another play.
Okay.
But she's the new president of the CLC. My union is led by a woman, Karen Littlewood from Barrie. She's fantastic. The Elementary Teachers Federation, another woman. So things are changing in the labor movement, where more women are taking on leadership roles, and you see it's a hopeful story that I wanted to connect with your play, which has hope and some harsh reality in it. So
yeah, because it's hard because bosses can wait out. Not necessarily public service unions in the same way, but in factories, in other kinds of places, it still is really stacked against the worker. Yes, would you agree with that?
For sure, and we live in a much more global world now than we did Peterborough in the 1960s.
Yeah.
And the great part of this story is that everybody knows the Pamet family, right?
Yeah.
I taught Pamets, I guarantee you, at Kenner.
Yeah.
I mean, and you know who the owner is, and there's a personal connection. Whereas nowadays, companies are bigger. You don't necessarily, if you're unionized,
owner,
it's a faceless
yeah.
thing. So you can always, I don't know.
Well, it happened to my father-in-law. He worked at the Atlas Steel in Welland, which was the largest employer in Welland in its day. And he retired. And he had made I always think of this interesting thing, especially around things like pensions. And he had made a commitment from the time he was 17 to work at Atlas. They would treat him right. He was in the union. He would put his money in, then they would match it, and he would have this pension for the rest of his life, right? Whichever pensions are, besides a lot of public service unions, are sort of gone, especially with people like me. And then it was sold to a company offshored and sold.
Right.
And they were mucking around with the pensions, and that's another interesting thing that I think we're seeing sometimes. Some of those Gold Star pensions, the bosses were actually not behaving properly with them. Yes.
Yeah, and this is the shame of it, because you put some trust. Like that's where the contract. That's the whole purpose of it, is that you have people who are looking out for you to make sure those things don't happen. And I know that. The GE workers renegotiated their contract at one point, and that really impacted a lot of people's savings and their retirement savings. And then we could go on about defined benefits versus defined contributions and so forth. But pensions are something that we really like if we have them, right?
Yeah, I bet you do.
And very lucky for every day.
But you also, your money is taken out. Like that. There's this great thing around the structure of a pension, where those of us who don't have them kind of think, well, we can never afford to contribute, right? You don't have that choice.
Well, it never. Yeah, it's 11% that gets taken off my paycheck every day, and so or every paycheck.
Yeah.
11%. So that's something. But you don't see it, then.
Yeah, suddenly it'll help eventually. Well, I am so thrilled you came to chat with me about it. You gave me so much information about unions and collective agreements and the whole thing. And we're here at Fourth Line so grateful. The Peterborough District Labour Council are one of the sponsors of the show. They put their money, you put your money where your mouth was. And we're so grateful for that, being able to let this play happen. It really is having a transformative impact.
Well, you know what? Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm really excited for you, because it's going to be a great show tonight, and you got beautiful weather.
Yeah, beautiful weather.
And sing along on all the songs. Make sure you sing along.
Yeah, we're going to teach you those. Would you all join me in thanking Dave Warda for his time?